This video is going to be a little more of a departure from the usual debunking of whatever the talking point du jour there is among gun control advocates today. Instead, I'm going to take a few minutes to help remind us who it is we are, what we are. Because you see, in this struggle to defend our rights, we are not defined so much by who it is we stand against as it is by what we stand for. And I got some encouragement for the direction of this particular video from an article that I had read earlier this week in American Thinker. And the gist of the article basically says that in order for gun control to be effective, gun control advocates have to sell a caricature of gun culture. And for that caricature to take root, gun owners have to buy into it. However, fortunately, we gun owners know the realities of gun culture and the vast divide between that reality and this fantastical caricature that gun control advocates try to sell. Now, I would encourage everyone to read the full article for themselves, but the most important paragraph, the most important lines out of this article are as follows. Generally speaking, law-abiding gun owners are of a different time and culture. They are anachronistic. To lawfully own a firearm is a commitment to timeless principles of maturity, personal responsibility, individual freedom, and civic awareness. It is a trust, a right possessed by free people who exercise their freedom carefully and mindfully. A right possessed by free people. There is a connection between free men and the right to bear arms. And that's what I'm going to explore in this video today.
But you can't keep no chains on me. I was born free.
And to help illustrate this point, I'm going to give you a brief cultural lesson about Switzerland. No, I'm not talking about the fact that they have actual military-grade assault rifles within their homes, although that is rooted in a tradition that pops up elsewhere in Swiss culture, namely voting. Every year in the canton of Appenzell, they hold what's called a Landsgemeinde, which is one of the last surviving examples of direct democracy in Switzerland today. And in a Landsgemeinde, eligible voters from all over the canton will gather in a certain town central square and directly vote on officials and other issues. Now that's interesting enough of itself, but what is really interesting is how an eligible voter shows that he has a right to vote. Now, at least for the voting men, a qualified voter will present a ceremonial sword or a military bayonet. And this harkens back to a time when ownership of a sword signified that you were a free man, could bear arms, and thus had the ability to vote. And here, at least as the Swiss have provided the example for us, you see the connection between free men and bearing arms. Now, the concept of a free citizenry bearing arms has its roots in ancient Europe. For example, the Greeks, like the Spartans, and Rome, like the pre-Republican Rome under Servius Tullius. Now, these societies required that their citizens contribute to the defense of their respective societies by having their citizens provide their own arms and armor. Now, using Sparta and Rome as examples have their own sets of problems. Sparta was a military society, and Rome had several different layers of citizenship, and both made extensive use of slave labor and denied their slaves access to arms, obviously in the interest of keeping the ruling classes in power. But this contrast between slave and citizen drives home a point that is made in a quote that is attributed to William Blackstone, who was an 18th century English jurist. The quote goes something like this, that free men have arms, slaves do not. Now, it's not really a direct quote. It's more a paraphrase of something found in his commentaries on English law. And those commentaries also examine a very important document in English history, namely the English Bill of Rights of 1689. In that document, it lists explicitly the right of Protestants to keep and bear arms in the interest of their own self-preservation. If you know anything about the history of England during this time, that right had been chipped away by pro-Catholic regimes in this tug of war between Catholics and Protestants, which prompted a lot of Protestants to move to the colonies in North America, and consequently brought these ideas with them. And in those commentaries, Blackstone says that this right is necessary when the sanctions of society and law fail to address oppression when it arises. In other words, it's one of the tools of free men to help remain free. Naturally, gun control advocates will scoff and say, honestly, do you really think that your piddling little AR-15 is going to stop the federal government from getting whatever it is it wants? Well, happily, there are precedents, such as the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, that happened not too long after World War II. Also, more recently, there was the incident that happened at Bundy Ranch, where a bunch of organized, armed free men stood up against the federal government and said, whoa, and the government self-corrected, which is the purpose of the Second Amendment and justifies an armed citizenry. Now, some gun control advocates might say to me, well, I don't need a gun to live free. And to which I say, good on you, because part of a right is the freedom to not exercise it. But whereas you can demonstrate your liberty by not exercising a right, I will demonstrate my liberty by exercising it safely and responsibly.